Thanks for tuning in. We've got another great conversation coming up with Elizabeth Bawol, who has already been on the podcast once. She is the creative director and handles brand and strategy, directs all of those things at Wide Eye. And we had a great conversation last time about some broader topics. And then I started hearing from other designers saying, what was that like? Did you guys talk about what it was like? And I'll get to what that is in a minute. But I thought, we really didn't dig in. So I wrote Elizabeth an email real quick, said, can we do another one real fast and dig in on some of this stuff? And she said, absolutely. So what that is what it was like to work on everything from the Harris campaign to, in the past, the Biden White House, the Biden-Harris White House, and just to be that involved in politics and political work like this, being so invested in the causes that you've been, mission driven in a lot of your work over many, many years. So I know you love doing work that you can believe in and feel good about mostly. But there are big egos, big personalities. There was a huge time crunch with Harris Walls. So yeah, thanks for joining and being willing to dig in. That's what we're going to try to dig in on.
Yeah. No small thing. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, for better or worse, maybe this is my Catholic upbringing coming through, but, like, I like to tell the truth. So, I think that the causes I've been a part of, I've believed in. I've always I always strive to tell a real story, an authentic story. I think that's what humans crave and can be a rarity. I was never very good, even though I've done bits and pieces of this. I was never very good at, like, making the spin, right? Like, this potato chip is great because of this, or, like, coming up with a spin to sell something. Like, I really need to believe in it. So, before I got to Wide Eye, I was also immersed in politics, sort of unavoidable, because I was creative director at Planned Parenthood, leading at their national office, and that was like getting attacked from the outside, trying to do creative, thinking about the brand, getting attacked from the outside, people trying to, like, dox people you're filming, like, all this crazy stuff, but always tied to the political cycle and the attacks from the right on reproductive rights. So, like, and then prior to that, at the one campaign, fighting for foreign aid, which is now again somehow up for debate, and we did a lot of chaos around that. And so, like, politics has really been a part of my world for, like, I guess about 14, 15 years now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm in it. I sometimes burn out, but I'm in it.
Well, that's a topic, right? Like burning out, because it is so high intensity and it is so vicious. Have you ever been threatened because of your association with any of the work that you've done?
No, not directly. However, I think what's worse is Planned Parenthood was a whole other level, right? Because, I worked there at a time when one of our health centers was essentially firebombed and some people died. Like, it was really, really horrific. And, like, I remember our leader at the time, who recently passed, Cecile Richards.
I saw that. I'm sorry. I was sorry to hear that or
I
see that.
mean, the world's loss is so
Yeah,
great there,
it
but
was
also,
outstanding.
but, she refused security as head of this organization because she didn't believe what we did was controversial. She was willing to stand up for it, and she said, "Until every abortion provider in every one of my clinics across the country can get security, I will not have it." And I remember that very, very clearly. But what
Wow, what a
was a
leader.
bigger
Yeah.
concern for me as creative director is, like, if I wanted to tell stories, like, a big part of what I did there was just, like, there's a million different stories of everyday people. 1 in 4 Americans have an abortion in their lifetime. Um, or I think that's a women of childbearing age, but regardless, it's a very common thing, but the story is different for everyone. So there's all kinds of stories, reasons people have them. circumstances in their lives, laws that made it difficult. And so a lot of what I did was trying to get people to tell their honest stories from in their own words without being overly crafted or media trained or something. Like people just want to hear and relate to other people.
Right.
And the risks that came up for me were people that I put into any kind of storytelling could be threatened, and that was far worse. So, I had to be very, very careful to, like, walk a line of anonymity for folks or, um, you know, really make sure there was nothing descriptive in the background if they're willing to take the risk because they might come after someone's family, like, there was this really well-funded opposition trying to change the story and spin the story. We had people drop out of like films we were doing because they were afraid or they got threats. So that's the kind of thing that was like I'm very, very conscious when someone's brave enough to tell their story to give them all sort of the what could happen. And
Yeah.
women of color in particular were often targeted. So is that was the kind of thing we were navigating in that respect.
So that's intense
Mm,
and makes sense. And I'm so glad there are organizations out there that are being brave and are sharing the stories of other brave people who refuse to be silenced, as it seems many would prefer. But when you get into the political side versus women's reproductive health, which you would think would not be a political issue,
right.
um, what was that like to work with? I mean, I've been exposed to people in politics through my new ish time with Adeo, but it's it's state politics, and everyone's mostly lovely. But I hear stories, and
Yeah.
I've heard stories about some of the rising stars, and when people get to a certain level, and you even see it on the state level. A lot of elected officials feel like they are, God's gift to the rest of us on all things, on all
Mhm.
topics. It's like, no, 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 you're here to handle X, Y, and Z of the state. You don't know everything about everything else. So tell me what, if you can name names, great, but like what were some of the personalities like
Yeah.
in
So
in
yeah.
this? Yeah.
Well, so what's interesting is, like, the amount of the game of telephone that is every political campaign I've been a part of is so bonkers, like, you wouldn't believe the number of people handling people who are handling people. That said, um, I overlapped with Kamala Harris a little bit because she was always a big proponent of repro rights, so she did a lot with Planned Parenthood.
Mhm.
I did not have, like, a personal relationship with her, so I don't wanna misrepresent that, but I had experienced her in very candid settings, some very formal settings, and I did not find she was guided by ego. I felt that she like I don't think this is me drinking the Kool-Aid. I mean, this is what I witnessed over something like 12, 13 years, maybe a little less. But like I think she was in it for with a sense of righteousness,
Mhm.
and I didn't see that super changed in terms which is why I really, really wanted to represent her authentically in the
Yeah.
Harris brand in the campaign, and it was very hard to do it because I felt I knew her like, well, having followed her for so long and knowing her more deeply than most of the American people did. I knew what she stood for. I knew what she was, passionate about on a lot of levels. And then, becoming part of a presidential campaign, they did this to Hillary a little bit too, like, without naming names, there's a lot of people handling the image, right? Like,
Mhm.
there's there's a comm strategy, a political strategy, there's a how do we combat the racism and sexism that has existed over the history of presidential elections in this country? And I think to my mind, there was so much handling. It was really hard to represent her in all her glory.
Yeah, I was curious about the brand book
Mhm.
and I mean, again, you guys had very little time.
Yeah. There were 5 of us, knee deep, arm deep, whatever you wanna call it, around the clock working on that brand book for, I think we only had like 8 days on the brand book itself, which was like 150 pages, had to go to like every vendor across the place, and it was being guided and implemented by their internal creative team, the Harris internal creative team, and they were great folks. But it was so much to manage for too few people, and like everything had to be in there just in case.
Yeah.
And then you still had a lot of vendors who just interpreted things or were like trying things out. So like I really didn't feel like the brand we created was really solidly out in the world until the last like month. Like people got it, figured it out, even though every detail and example that could possibly have come up was in that book.
But I mean, you had to make so many decisions so quickly. And like you said, there's all these handlers, there's all these people involved superfluously,
Yeah.
adjacent to what you're trying to do. Did that cause a lot of problems? Was it a lot of hurry up and then wait, or
There was
was
no
it just
waiting.
all
There was
hands
no
on deck?
time. And I actually think that might have been good for us. Like
Yeah.
I had a real gut about what made Harris uniquely good for America in this moment in time and what characteristics of her personality I wanted to make sure shined through. But however, like when we presented concepts to the White House, we presented to 22 people. She was not in the room at that time. Someone else shared it with her later and all this stuff that happened. But like it happened so quickly. And, there's so much caution in politics, right? You have to think about and I'm not suggesting they were wrong so much as there's a spin that has to be done, right? Like to meet voters where they are, to make sure she seems presidential enough, which is a bonkers definition in this country,
Yeah.
seeing as we've never had a woman president. And similarly, I feel like the way, I wasn't on the Hillary campaign. I know a lot of folks that were, and I think the person that I've seen Hillary to be in speeches, in events and things, um, is not necessarily what the American public saw. And I think once, this is my personal opinion representing no one but myself, but once we stop trying to spin it and let Bartlett be Bartlett, let female candidates be who they are,
Yeah.
I actually think like you don't have to hide that she's a woman. You don't have to hide that she's a stepmom. You don't have to lean into it all the time. And you don't have to hide what she cares about. Like,
Yeah,
and
there didn't seem like there was a lot of, attempts at cloak and mirrors or keeping things behind the curtain, with the campaign.
no, it was just more that it had to fit in the box, right? The box that we put campaigns in, the box
Yeah.
that we put candidates in. And I think we tried to create a brand that allowed other people to own it a little bit, allowed other people to see themselves in it. But did it fully authentically represent her? I'm not sure. Not all the way, maybe. Like it was her, but also like melded with what we think commanders in chief are. And
Yeah.
I think some of that is misguided and not quite authentic.
Well, you certainly didn't have time to really dig in. I was noticing though, I mean, I love that you've got the font choices, right? So
God, the font choices.
with Denton being, one of the choices, but then with Fearless being the name of one of the typefaces, being fearless, and then Balto with the other one, and being in
Oh man, did
Baltimore,
we talk typefaces. Like, we probably spent the most time on color and typefaces, and I did not totally win all the arguments on color, but, um, and this is a credit to Wide Eye and the creative team at Harris, like, that everyone were I mean, it was like a group of 6 or 7, but, like, 2 or 3 type nerds talking overnight to all different foundries. We
yeah, I mean, it
also
seemed very, very purposeful and very
Yeah, and Fearless was actually a typeface that was far more custom that a foundry actually modified for us and renamed in this, like, crazy 3 days span. They were in France. Balto was, obviously Baltimore, where I think her first campaign headquarters was, and then Denton was actually used by the Biden campaign, so, like and that was the piece that, like, I struggled a little bit with, was it was so traditional,
yeah.
and I don't think she's a candidate or was, but, these are the nuances that we debated and, like, arm wrestled over, and it was like, I also wanted her palette to feel a little different than the typical American palette, or typical like red, white, and blue. And like I lost some color battles in that whole process too.
Yeah.
So like, little pieces got eked away, and like this is how it works. It was all a
That's how
little bit
it
of horse
works.
trading and navigating all the visions of who she should be to the public and all the voters. And, honestly, I think if she had another month to campaign, we would be looking at a really different result, but the timing was really, really
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah, we'll never know, unfortunately. Were you guys involved in working with them sort of default because of your past work with the Biden-Harris White House in general, or was it a competitive process to get involved, or were they just like, "We don't have time. You guys did the White House stuff, the Biden-Harris
So
stuff, like, let's go."
why I think a lot of this is the founder of Wide Eye, Ben Osterauer, did I think he started off with like Bernie's logo back in the day. And so we had actually as a company kind of evolved out of politics somewhat. And then because we had done, or Wide Eye had done, this was before my time, her 2019 campaign. I think now I will say I was in Alaska the weekend this happened, but some ideas were just pitched to them and we said, "Hey, we're here if you need us." And that was all it took. And we got connected and threw some crazy ideas their way, and then they hired us. We started from scratch, and I think I had 2 minutes notice before presenting the concept I had worked up to the White House. Seriously, like literally less than 2 minutes, and I was like, "All right, let's go. I know this candidate. I know what the intention is behind this creative, and let's go." And it was just like a room of amazing, mostly women who were there for it, and
That's
who
all.
I think ran a great campaign
It sounds like it
despite
was a yeah, I mean, despite losing, it sounds like there was a lot of, um, unity and cohesion from the get-go, which I think the public could sense just in the messaging and the way that things got rolling. It felt very unified. Um, was there Okay, so here's another question about, like, big profile politics work like this. Is it the same as, like, big celebrity or, like, big big media where they're like, "Well, you get to work with us, so we're gonna pay you peanuts."
no, 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 no. I mean, this is probably because, we work with Democrats too. I mean, I will say I've had a lot of interaction with brands that have to navigate celebrities because the one campaign was founded by Bono and a lot of celebrities were attached to that. And then at Planned Parenthood, there were just certainly a lot of celebrities that wanted to work with us. So, like, and there was a lot in those circumstances, again, not naming names, there were a lot of celebrities that needed to be handled very carefully, did have big egos. Every photo or pour needed to be examined before a social media graphic would go out, for example. So like that was a level of profile and intensity I didn't love. The intersection of branding and celebrity was challenging. I will say Bono's a lot more humble than you might think. He's quite
Good to hear.
humble. Yeah. Anyway, so all of that was like very, very complicated. I think and maybe this is naivete, but like most of the candidates I've worked with, and I was able to work on, or campaigns I've worked on, I was able to work on Stacey Abrams. We did her gubernatorial campaign when I first started at Wide Eye. And like these are the people that I've interacted with from the political side have been public servants. Like, even if I'm not working with a candidate directly, there's people that believe in a vision. The vision is not about the individual as much as it is about the greater good. And that's like the biggest difference between the parties right now, right? Is like one is motivated not by the greater good, at least not the inclusive, diverse greater good.
Well,
Um,
yeah.
it's
Well,
the
they're even lying to most of the people who they're saying they're invested in their greater good.
Yeah, so, like, I find that I'm sure there's far more ego than I see, like, but for the most part, the candidacies that I've been around or part of branding have been fairly pure, fairly clear in terms of and decisive in terms of which direction we're going.
What was it the same case when you were working for the Biden-Harris White House and, like, designing that? Because, I mean, to me, I always say, if you're gonna get into the brand water with anybody, be
Mhm.
prepared because it's like you're like trying on different faces for their baby and they're going to be like, "Oh, but can we make it look, it's like they just people get their hands wrapped around that and there's a lot of emotional attachment to it.
So
So a campaign I can understand you don't have time.
yeah.
Um,
I didn't work on the White House, the Biden-Harris White House. That was before my time, but my understanding is that even for that one, there's a few people that like, the thing about politics is, like, the perfect isn't the enemy of the good. Maybe it isn't a press release or, like, a public statement, but it's not in creative. Like, I think maybe to a fault, they underestimate the power of brand. Like, you look at Trump's brand, right? And he has the power of the MAGA brand, which is, if I was to qualify the characteristics of that, it's allowing people to express bigotry and hate and an idea of America that is white-centered, white male-centered. And then you have the Trump brand, which a lot of people in this country seem to think of as the new American dream, right? The gold-plated American
no,
dream that
no matter
anyone
how
can
long
achieve.
we talk about the corruption and the bankruptcies
I mean,
and the
this is a whole other podcast, but my point really is just that the brand power and recognition that Trump brought against someone who really had to be reintroduced to the American people, had to be branded and out in the world in 107 days, and almost won. Came closer than it like, if you look at the votes,
yeah, it was close.
it was damn close. So,
And a
like,
lot of people just didn't vote. So, a lot of people didn't vote,
there's so many
which
that
boggles
didn't.
my mind, but
I know.
no,
It's like
you're really right, right? And one thing Trump has always been good at is managing to schlock that brand around
yeah,
and find a home for it in whatever, gaudy gold
yeah.
toilet.
Like, you have a visceral reaction to it. I do. I see a
Yeah.
Trump Tower and I'm like, "I wanna throw up."
Yeah, but it's his name and the MAGA colors, the anger behind
Mhm.
it, the
It's consistent.
masculinity in it. It's well
And what he
done
can't
for
do with the Trump brand, he
yeah.
can do with the MAGA brand, and
Yeah.
sort of vice versa, because MAGA is not gonna be a luxury brand of any kind. It's really interesting, like, some people have said it's the non-brand, and I don't think that's true at all.
Oh,
I think it's
no.
a very deliberate, dumbed down
Yeah.
brand.
Yeah, it is a very, very, it's like a Cro-Magnon brand.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And, yeah, it's like a big stick
And I think
that
Harris was navigating the Biden brand, right? Because she was a
yeah,
part of that administration, and, that didn't give her a lot of brand equity, right? Like, that gave her a little bit of baggage, in my opinion. So, like,
that's interesting.
at least from a public perception, not necessarily a record perspective, and so, when you think about it exclusively from a brand perspective and not a political strategy perspective, which isn't my expertise, right? I can understand it was almost such a long shot, I didn't allow myself to believe was a long shot because of so much at stake, but
Well, there's a fine line between elegance and elitism,
mhm.
and I can see where you had to not go too far into anything that could be read too much as elitism or,
Yeah, it's a flaw of the
intellectual, East Coast, liberal vibe, and yet, that's a lot of what infuses the brand with energy,
and
um,
just personality,
and
right? Like,
reality, yeah.
we were always walking this line between simplicity, minimalism, and depth, and I think that's obviously, like, a dangerous line. It can get too simple and underwhelming if it's pushed in the wrong direction, or it can be sort of owned by the masses in another. So, like, we had to do that so carefully, but, like, I can say that where I wanted to lean in more and really couldn't, for me, just as a human and a woman in this country, like, as a female candidate, the first female Black candidate president, the first Asian American president, like, she stood for so many firsts and represents so much more of an inclusive group of Americans with her racial identity, with her the things she's advocated for,
Yeah.
and, all of that, the sort of idea of first, and this showed up a lot in the concept documents, was so incredibly important to me, and leaning into what made her different. And ultimately, I think maybe the reason that smart folks push back on that, or it was downplayed a bit, is America clearly wasn't quite ready for that. I'll always wonder if we had doubled down on some of this, would it have worked better? I don't know. I'll never know. But like when the racism, sexism, biases that exist are the question mark, right? Like
Yeah, and like
how much did that factor in? Like the talk of her laugh, like that doesn't happen to men, right? Like, so, or male candidates, like she kept being called Kamala and it drove me bonkers because I was like, she's Harris. Male candidates go by their last name. Why is she Kamala, Mamala? Like, why is that? And like, it was such a tough, it was, it was really a head, you know,
there's
lot.
there's got to be a lot of what ifs that you go back to and wonder about. That's got to be one of the harder parts of work like that.
I mean, I will say that, like, I don't think there's a lot I would do different. Like, we gave it our all. We didn't sleep. We fought amongst ourselves and, like, with powers that be, with the campaign, not in, like, an aggressive way, but
Right.
we fought for what
Passionate way.
we cared about, and, like, I fought for what I thought we should lean into, and, like, sometimes I won and sometimes I lost, but, like, we really gave it our all, so, like, it's more just, like, I'll never totally know what could have made that difference, which would have changed the course of world history. Like how much of it was the comm strategy or the political strategy, or like something that was said in front of the wrong crowd, like on a campaign trail, or like just the inherent bigotry and hatred of women, professional women that haven't born children. Like, I just don't know how many, I don't think anyone really knows the depth with that impacted the results. And that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. Like, when is this country gonna be ready? Like, will I see it in my lifetime?
I think I think we're experiencing a last gasp of a power system that is
God, I hope
desperate
you're
to
right.
hold on, but that's for a separate podcast.
I really hope you're right. That's definitely, like, an optimistic take on what's happening.
Well, if we just look at the numbers,
Yeah,
it's it, they're going to have to do what they're doing right now if they have any hope of holding on to control. So
yeah,
we just have to make sure we don't give them all that they are trying to take, and that's going to come down to the people
yeah.
and not the government, unfortunately. Um, so what would was there were there any moments that stood out to you where it was like a really intense we won't say fight, right? But a really intense conversation back and forth. What did if you could share what one comes to mind or a
Mm.
few?
Well, so I think what was really challenging for me was that even though I was a creative director on the project, our ECD founder is a designer, right? And he was the one largely communicating with the campaign as this thing was rolling. I was working with our team to build out the brand. He was talking to them, but I think he was probably getting signal things in the middle of the night and like talking to typographers at 4 in the morning because they're in front. And I was always sort of this. I haven't in many, many years not been sort of totally in charge of the creative. So like, I also was like, I had to talk to him and hear what other people it was so there was so much triangulation, I think, and I don't really blame him for that. It was sort of the way this thing was happening, and no one can be awake all the time, but I it was all filtered, right, to some degree, and I wasn't necessarily going toe to toe with the campaign all the time or toe to toe with the typographers, so or making so it was like that was probably the trickiest for me, was, like, not hearing in the moment what was next and, like, what had been decided, or, like, not being a part of every decision because in something this important, you gotta be every decision matters so much.
Well, what comes to mind is how much backtracking did that cause, or work going
Yeah.
in a direction that had to get
It was
tossed, or
tricky. It
yeah.
was tricky, and, like, it's just things were moving so fast. It's like the priorities changed constantly. Like, we're trying to build out this brand book, we're trying to test it, and we're trying to negotiate low enough rates with these typographers. And then some typographers are like, if you're working on a presidential campaign, it can't be for the right because we won't help you. And we're like, no, 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 no. Can't tell you anything more, but it's not for Trump. And it was like that kind of stuff. Like, one creative director couldn't have done it all. But like, there were things like, in the original typeface that became Fearless, the eye had this sort of really unique characteristic that I loved. And others didn't agree with me. It was too individual. It was too unique. It would stand out too much. And I was just like, I really fought for that for a moment. The Harris versus Kamala thing, I struggled with a lot and pushed for, and like that was frustrating to me just as a woman. Like, I want female. I actually wrote a Medium piece about it because I'm so tired of women candidates being treated differently by the press, by even their own campaigns. Like, how often was Hillary defined by her husband as opposed to herself and her candidacy? And like, with Harris, I just wanted the gravitas that I'd seen in her and the charisma to come through. And so there were all these little decisions where at some point it felt like, all that gravitas, all that individuality, all those firsts that I wanted to lean into sort of were getting chipped away in order to make sure this felt like a presidential campaign.
Mhm.
And that was probably the hardest thing for me to navigate, was like, where can I pick my battles and where do I really dig deep and go after something? And, I won some, I lost some.
Did you, was there a cutting room floor of like things you wished could have gone out as posters or,
Oh, yeah.
whatever?
In fact, there was a whole line of merch that never made it to the store that I actually put on my website because it was so good and we spent so much time on it. And it was in the brand book actually, but I think just no one had time to make it. Like, that campaign, if we thought we were working hard, like, I think that campaign had, I don't know what it was. I think it was under 50 creatives or something, but like, they were doing every campaign event. And like, I just think like some stuff just didn't even get there. There wasn't enough time. And that was a shame. Like, we had these t-shirts that said, "I'm speaking," which was such a good quote of hers. And like,
Yeah.
some other things. The other piece that I think was really tricky was when a VP candidate was named. What does that do to the brand, right? Because like, Walls is a
Yeah.
really
Yeah. I
different
was reading a
smell,
little bit about that.
and it's got to be
How long
infused
did,
in, and yeah, it
what
was
if his
tough.
name's really long or her name's really long or,
I will say that was the worst typographic lockup. We did all the lockups, and Walls just kerns weirdly with the W and the, and so we actually ended up going to the typographers in most cases and having them tweak it. Or like, I think with Balto, I can't remember his name at the moment. Forgive me, but he was like, "Hey, you got to fix this thing." And then we had a second set of logos that went out, and it was like, so if you look really carefully, there's two sets of logos that showed up over the course of that campaign with minor tweaks, but they were clear to us. We're like, "Wait, are they using the right logo?"
oh, is it Tal Lemming?
Yes, tell
Yeah.
him. Yeah. We also, for a little while, in one of the initial concepts, used Tatsuro, which is a beautiful typeface. Didn't quite work for her brand in the end, and I really agree with that. But it's the typeface that is on that famous "I am American" sign, or "I am an American," as part of the protest against Japanese internment. So anyway, it was like a really great story of civil sort of social justice, and human rights, and like there was that element to it which would have loved to make work, but
Yeah.
didn't quite work for her and wasn't what they wanted to lean into, right?
And how much so I mean, are you pitching these ideas along with the visuals and sort of explaining like this approach is inspired by the Japanese protesting against the internment camps or, like
Yeah. We walked
all
through all of this. We really only had one presentation to the White House,
Yeah.
and it was that room of 22 people or something. And we had three concepts that we brought.
Okay.
And one leaned into this idea of being a joyful warrior, and like joy infused
Mhm.
in her sort of fight. And we had some inspiration from boxing posters and just different things in there that were kind of interesting. Another one was firsts. And that was more one I worked up with this amazing art director on our team, Grace. And there were others that worked on it different times. So I shouldn't, like Elena, Sebastian, others on the team certainly like put a lot of color into that one too, but that one leaned more into the personality and charisma and like identity, her vision for America being an inclusive one. And that one leaned into more a less traditional palette, but was the closest one to what the brand ended up being. And then, honest to God, I don't even remember the third one at this point. But there were three concepts. They chose one in that room and then took a bunch of iterations to her and her team and her close team, I guess. And she greenlit it. There was no noodling. There was no. This is the thing. I think politicians just don't have time. They're like, that looks good or that
Yeah.
doesn't. I'm
Decisive.
done. Go.
Decisive.
Yeah.
Um, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah.
Tell me how that was also happening
Yeah, well,
and
so
what was going on there.
all of that was prior, which is good because if they had happened at the same time, I think I would have jumped off something, but, so that one was so interesting because that was like, create a brand for the current Democratic Party and the voters that we really need to be listening, and, like, this wasn't between, like this was basically about undecided voters, right?
And when did you
And
start this work? When you started this work, did
was
had
March,
Biden
April.
announced that he was
No, that's the problem.
okay.
So, it was all Biden, and the direction we got, the creative brief we got was essentially really needs to be infused with the Biden campaign, like, they need to be like this, it's all about Biden, we're gonna double down on Biden, and, like, it didn't start that way, like, at first it was like, "Can you all craft a brand for the Democratic Party?" But then our candidate was sort of like old established Democratic Party and, like, where we felt the party or I should speak for myself, where I felt the party was different, right? Like, and this is about moving people that were undecided about voting at all, right? More than anything, it was about getting people up off the couch that are Democrats but are disillusioned, right? So we
And
had
just to be
some
clear, this
wild
is
stuff.
all I just wanna be clear to anybody who's listening and isn't familiar. So this is all the brand, but also the like the experience space, the design of the experience of being at the DNC and what you saw on TV if you tuned in.
Yeah.
That was all being designed.
Yep.
And had you all done like a big in space,
Well, so
physical
I think there are like 70 vendors that actually contribute to the Democratic National Convention. So, like, what we do at our best is create brands that are strategic,
yeah.
and we then build books that are that basically imagine it at any scale in any format that could possibly be designed. And like, so we had
Is your book basically like the system? It's like a
examples.
brand that
Yeah, I mean, for
has a
politics, it's often more focused on the design, right? Like,
yeah.
but for most brands, for nonprofits, when we actually have a reasonable amount of time and it's not some crazy pressure, it's more like, here's your orientation to the brand itself. This is what it's about. This is what it means. Get inspired. And then here's your accessibility chart. Here are all your colors. Here's how you spec all the things. Here's the brand in action. And like, go. With something like the DNC or even the Harris campaign, they're so obsessed with words and mixed messages that could go out that like most of that brand personality we keep quiet.
Mhm.
And it was more just about the experience and the brand itself. But like
Okay.
some of our concepts were really cool and really different than what the Democratic Party was sort of known for, but where we ended, and we had lots of lively debates with the DNC team, but like where we ended was we got to get all of our ducks in a row right behind Biden, right? So we had done this whole thing when that announcement happened. And then the DNC was like 4 weeks away. And we started on the Harris work. And it was like, well, shit. This train has left the station. How should we try and shift? Like, and there were banners all over Chicago. So it was like, nope, her tie to that administration is going to be on full display. And, we made it work. But there wasn't a lot we could change by the time that announcement was made. I think it would have looked a lot differently if we had planned it for Harris.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, so many things I could say about that timing, but
Yeah.
I won't. Were there any, it sounds like it was again just a very focused, very unified effort,
Mhm.
and then a very unified hard left when the decision was made for Biden to withdraw and to elevate Harris. Um, were there were there any like, oh, you got to be fucking kidding me, like moments where just shit went wrong, or like a vendor blew something up, or you know somebody got COVID, or I mean, it doesn't have to be like somebody was an asshole,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there's got to be some moments along the way where you were just like, I
yeah.
really don't need this right now.
I will say both, uh, Ben, the founder of White Eye, and I got COVID during the Harris work, which was like an intensive 3 to 4 weeks, and, like, we were working through COVID and we're, like, raspy voice, like, not on camera, and it was like there were some tense moments because we were just both so miserable within, like, 4 days of each other,
Oh
um,
yeah.
but with the DNC, you know, I honestly felt like I sort of enjoyed the Harris work more than the DNC only because there was more time. At the time we were doing the DNC work, it was a little more time up front, lot more debates, and, like, we did find ourselves a couple times in a room with, like, the head of production or, like, an event guy, like, a handful of different folks that we hadn't met before that weren't part of the full concepting process, and we're asking a lot of questions and, like, getting micro into things like the banner on the videos, and it was just like, clients are gonna client, but, some of that was like, "Dude, let us do what we do." Can you just follow the book? Like, seriously, like, we thought this through. We talked about it. It's all intentional, and, like, we just sorta had to defend that and defend that to all different new players, and
Yeah.
then the beauty of both of these, I will say, is that once it was out of our hands, for better or worse, it was out of our hands. So, like, we weren't checking every screen that was gonna go up. Like, we went to the DNC, and there were a couple times I was like, "Ooh, that went too far in the stars," or, like, whatever, but, like, there were experts on all different levels that were like, "This has gotta look good on camera. This is
Yeah.
how it's gonna frame up the speaker, like, this is where the podium is and the lighting on the podium." So, like, we
So you
couldn't be everywhere.
you handed off the baton
Yeah.
and then hoped for the best.
It was a year of exercising, like, accepting what we can't control.
So you mentioned something that, I want to dig in on a little bit, which was that you enjoyed the Harris work more because you had more time. And yet,
No,
oh,
we had less time. I think that's why.
okay, all right. So you enjoyed it more because you had less time. Well, the concept, the time, the issue of time, and so many, I remember saying the same, feeling the same thing when I was back, actually designing things and working on deadlines with client work, and just always wishing there was more time. Like, oh, what,
Yeah.
that deadline? But I've come to really appreciate that sometimes, like, the faster the deadline, the more opportunity there is, because you don't have time to
Right.
sit and like noodle over things or what if about things. Um, you have to make quick decisions. You have to be bold. You have to,
Yeah.
if you're really going to hit that deadline. And in this case, you had to hit the deadline.
I
So
mean, the
yeah,
deadline was just yesterday for everything.
yeah,
So it was like, we just had to do everything as fast as possible. I will say, I
fast
think we
and
noodled on type a little too long. For my taste, I was, like, ready to make that decision, like, a week earlier so we could get moving. Um, and that was tough because we had some real type geniuses slash obsessive craftsmen
yeah,
all involved in it, and it mattered so much. But for the most part, it was just like bang, 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 yes, no, and your gut on a lot of this stuff, if you've been doing this long enough, is usually, like, right. And so it was a situation where clients couldn't client. They had to just trust us because they had too much going on, you know?
yeah. Well, when you've got that many players too, I mean, I'm surprised to hear that there weren't some like, young up and comers that were trying to make their mark felt by overstepping their influence, or their overstepping their position in the chain of
Yeah.
feedback that has to move quickly so that things can
I mean,
advance.
I think the creative team, and this isn't like, good gossip, but, like, the creative team at Harris was they were exceptional to work with. Like, they weren't they had no problem letting us do what we were doing and taking our steer, and then they would ask us questions about it. And there was a point where they were like, "We're trying to implement it. It's not quite working. Can you adjust stuff, or can you talk to us about what you were thinking, or show us an example of this?" Because, like, right, like a lot of what Democrats love to put out on social media is like text heavy, right? Like stuff that no one will read because it's
Yeah.
so long, and like get to the point, right? Like they don't. Everyone doesn't need the nuance, and you don't have to prove how smart you are, that kind of thing. And like, and they were very much like, you guys crafted this, tell us how this should go, we're not quite getting it right. Like there were young folks, but there weren't, I didn't navigate, at least, any big egos. There were I only interacted with like the top folks over there, but like
Well, it sounds like
um
there was a lot of trust, and I guess there was some history with Wide
yeah,
Eye
I think that's what it was.
and some of the key members of that team. But where do those people come from when they're putting together an internal team like that? Is that just, I mean, what happens to these people after they just have such a
It's so funny because
intense
like
experience
it's
like
like
that?
it's like a whole Wizard of Oz city like got created and then disappeared.
Yeah.
You know? And, like, so many talented folks, like, it's funny, I was at the DNC, and, someone that used to work on my team at Planned Parenthood was like, "Hey, I'm a producer for Harris. I'm down here videotaping. The DNC looks great." And I was like, "Of course, cool." But, like, all these people that are in the sphere of social justice, branding work, or creative work, or, like, were anywhere connected to the Hillary campaign or whatever, kind of just, like, converged on this
Yeah.
opportunity, right? And then, with the knowledge that at the end of it, it's gonna go up in smoke, it's poof, it's gone, right?
Yeah,
And
I guess
like
if you're used to the campaign world, that's what you're used
yeah,
to.
yeah. I mean, I will say at this age in my life, I never ever thought I would be getting involved in something this nuts. I don't think I could do it all the time. Like, I could not have another year like last year.
Yeah, it's, not for the faint of heart. Um, but there must, yeah, the trust had to be there to move as quickly as you all did.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and to honestly say, "Wait, this typeface isn't working, we need more of this," or "Adjust the brand book this way, we're seeing this," as we design 100 graphics in a row in one night.
yeah,
And that being able to be responsive to that without question, like, we debated the stuff that really mattered,
yeah.
and we let the other shit go and, like, just helped each other, and I think that it was a good group of people, and a
Um,
small, you'd be amazed at how small.
do you know who came up with the idea for the camo hat?
I don't actually, I should know.
Well, to whoever that person is, thank
I know,
you.
I love it.
I love
Well,
my
I think that
camo
might
hat.
have just been what we loved about that was, like, I think that was just a person, like, not someone connected to the campaign itself.
Oh,
I
really?
think. And, like, that was the goal, right? Like, part of why the logo was so simple and we didn't embellish it with stars and stripes and crap was because we wanted it to be beautiful, simple, and, she is such a clear, decisive prosecutor, right? Like, there was something about making it as simple and like, solid as possible that was really important, but also we wanted people to take it and put it on things. And,
Yeah,
like, we created a whole tertiary palette, I think, so that different unions and things could, like, make their own placards and use their brand color, but use the brand. And so, like, it had to be so incredibly versatile to meet all the needs. And so the camo hat was one of the first where we're like, somebody took it and made it something else.
awesome,
Like, that was
awesome.
the point, you know?
So along those lines, were there any other places where you saw it kind of be grassroots activated, in ways where you were like, "Ah, yes, it's working as intended."
I think I was actually, like, heads down so much that, like, it wasn't I
You thought
only when
to
something
notice.
really broke through was I even paying attention to it. I should
Yeah,
look back because this has happened a couple times in my career where something's taken off and been redefined by the masses, and man, is it like it's like the it's like the best kind of success, or, like, it's just it's so much more powerful than if a brand puts something out and manages it to a, you know, as much as possible. Like, I worked on a campaign at, Planned Parenthood way back in the day where all these bans and limits and things were being pushed through state by state, and there was all of a sudden, like, a massive amount of them. This was during the Trump years, and, the first Trump years.
shocking.
And so I came up with a few ideas for a campaign. We had to launch it in 2 weeks. I'm really good at these, like, short windows to come up with ideas, like, and
Be careful, be careful, but you're gonna start getting
I
people
know.
reaching out to you.
It
"We
was
need
the
something
ban
tomorrow, Elizabeth."
Right. It was, the pressure helps, but it was the Bands Off My Body campaign,
Oh,
which
yeah, I remember that.
yeah, and we put it out as a brand, and we made some really finished produced videos and all these other things, but then a couple years later, and this was almost towards the end of my tenure at Planned Parenthood and after, it went like it was showed up at all the marches and it showed up in all these different ways, and then all these creators and artists made their own Bands Off, and so now you see it everywhere still, because obviously we're still in the 1950s in terms of reaper rights, but like we it everyone has taken it and redefined it. It doesn't look anything like the original brand, but that phrase still like lives on, and like it's one of the things I'm like most proud of, even though like I can't claim it in time. You know what I mean? Like it became something else, which is exactly what you hope happens with something.
Yeah, well, you had a major role in giving birth to that, and then exactly as intended, you gave it away, and
Yeah.
everyone else got to grab a hold and turn it into what they needed it to be, which is, what I love about brand, and I
Yeah.
often would get so frustrated with clients I worked with in the past, back when I was running FastSpot, because they just thought about everything in such a siloed way, right? Like a web
Oh
"Oh,
yeah.
we're gonna talk to you guys about a website project, but we've got some people over here that are working on, some other major marketing initiative, and, oh, but none of those people are actually talking to this group, and they're the ones that are responsible for, like, all the fundraising," or, like, I mean, higher ed, classic example,
Mhm.
all of
Oh
those
yeah.
things not working together, and what I started to experience, and I believe very strongly now, is that especially in digital, you are going to add, if you're doing a good job, and let's say that you just are doing it's web work, web design, you have an opportunity to really breathe life into a brand in a way that cannot be done without going through that experience of the
Yeah.
website, right? And you can actually, I think, have a pretty big impact on the way that the internal organizational structure works
Mhm.
and sees itself, that
Yeah.
I think is very akin to a rebrand or a brand kind of resuscitation.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so excited now to be working with those kinds of clients, but saying, "All right, well, while the development work is underway, let's keep thinking about this idea we
Mhm.
have started exploring in the digital space around this concept or this aspect of your brand.
Yeah.
Um, let's take that and activate it. We don't need to your logo. Who cares? I mean, nobody's changing their logo. You're sticking with your tagline. Let's bury it somewhere else. But we've identified other things that matter,
Yeah.
or we've found ways to make the things that they had been using poorly matter more appropriately. And there are so many ways to activate that, right? Like more of
Yeah.
a campaign mindset,
Sure.
um, that I think traditional marketing and brand, worlds are much more comfortable with. And then you've got this whole other world of and I think nonprofits are in there too, right? Where they just don't realize the power of a campaign, the power of a brand within a brand, a sub-brand, a brand for a campaign,
Yeah.
and what
It's so
that means
interesting.
besides just a
Yeah.
logo and a look.
Well, and it's so interesting because, like, I don't know if you've come across this in higher ed, but with nonprofits, the they care so much about the way they're structured and their hierarchies and, like, making people comfortable and building consensus, but, like, rarely are they thinking, "How is an audience gonna experience this?" Right? Like, for example, on the Bands Off campaign, I remember navigating so many approvals and, like, crazy conversations where they were like, "But they're not all bands." Like, some of them are amendments, and some of them, and I mean, honestly, I had like 12 of these conversations with different people
Oh,
because 'cause they're very specific, smart, lawyers, policy people.
yeah,
It
death
was like
by 1,000
so I'm
feedbacks.
like, "Let me explain brand 101 to you and marketing 101." And and it's like, you have to get people to grab onto an idea,
Yeah.
not necessarily give them all the specifics all at once and in the name and in all the and I mean, I've never met a web problem that wasn't a brand problem actually to solve, so, like, it's just what you're saying really rings true, and I just think that, like, I find it very hard to get nonprofits out of the space of we have to be so literal and specific, and we have to explain what we do wrong. And, it comes from a good place, right? It's really good intentions. We're not always perfect at our work. We're constantly evolving and getting better. And like
Yeah.
sometimes we've done things wrong. Let's do a press release about all the things we've done wrong. And I'm I'm always like, all right, let's try this again. You were gonna dress up for a wedding. What would you look like, sound like? Like your best self is what we want your audiences. Everyone makes mistakes, but like what people need to hear is like, what's the world you want to create? Like, what's the inspiration point? Like, what are you at your best?
Well, especially now, right? Like, especially now, if you're a nonprofit or cultural or higher ed or,
Yeah.
focused on just trying to help. Um, and you're not fortunate enough to be like a consumer brand who is already like, Bombas, it's
Mhm.
like they've already got their brand in place. I feel good about these socks and these slippers.
They represent me well. I'll
Yeah,
work for
yeah.
this brand.
But I think any other organization out there really has to think about it from a product,
Yeah.
from a
Yeah.
from a
You're
from a
not wrong.
from
Yeah.
a yeah, from a product or a brand business kind of mentality.
Yeah.
I think a lot has to shift because you do have to get better at getting out there and connecting and communicating the way that consumer brands do.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, they're not doing it because they have lots more money. They're
No.
doing it because they understand
Yes.
brand better.
Yeah. I mean, this was sort of the premise that Wide Eye was founded on, was like these nonprofits, these people doing amazing stuff in the world, they deserve to get the attention of a Nike. Like they deserve the kind of branding and websites that like
Yeah.
set them apart in that really sophisticated way. And I think what we run into often, not naming any clients, is that, yeah, but we got to please this board member. And like, yeah, but we don't totally do it exactly that way all the time. And, it's like the perfect being the enemy of the good. And
Yeah. You
it
do need
gets
to
in the
you
way
need
of
a
a cohesive message and
well, I
brand.
guess, yeah, I would say, you need that kind of bold leadership and vision at the top, right?
Yeah.
You need to have, like, a president at a school
Yes.
or the head of the board of a nonprofit or a museum or whatever needs to be saying, "This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is where we're going. This is how fast we're gonna go there. These are the people we're going there with to get this accomplished."
And this is who we're talking to.
Yeah,
This is
and this is
usually
who
not
matters. This is who matters most. Prioritize.
Yeah.
So, all of you are lovely and important, and we want your money to keep flowing in, but let's just remember this is not for us to sit and peck over during lunch,
Right.
and discuss, right? It's with this important work we need to get out there for the people who matter most,
Yeah.
which are not the people in that room,
Never.
in
I
any
mean,
of the
very
rooms.
rarely.
Yeah, very rarely, and I always try to set that table very clearly,
Yeah.
when I start working with clients, not in a mean way, not just in a, like, we're still gonna have a lot of fun, it's gonna be exciting, and we're gonna make bold decisions, and we're gonna see results, but, let's not forget.
One of the biggest things I've observed about the difference between corporate brands and nonprofit brands is it seems like they just, like, wanna check with everybody, make sure everybody feels good about it.
The
And
nonprofit brands?
yeah, and corporations don't do that. They have a brand team or a comms team or whatever it is,
Yeah,
and
that's
then they have a leader who approves stuff, and in my experience, it's like, "Yeah, that's on brand. No, that's not. Like, let's go." But and maybe it's just because there's more money on, like, I don't really know why. Not maybe it's just the people that go to nonprofits are extra nice, but, like, I've tried to figure out what the secret to this is, because other than, like, just structuring a Darcy up front or a mocha or whatever you call it, like, to make sure that we know who needs to prove what, but, like, the bringing people along in a really generous way, it really adds a lot of time and inefficiency and can be really challenging just because there's a desire to make everybody happy.
well, I think either it's to make everybody happy or I think there's a lot of internal creative teams
Yeah,
that are dying for, like, some of that outside engagement and
yeah,
collaboration. Because once you go in-house, right, like, the clock starts ticking. I'm only being exposed to the problems of one organization. I'm
yeah,
only, learning as fast as I can take time away to, go to,
Yeah.
maybe get it paid for even, go to a conference, like keep evolving and keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening.
Yeah.
That becomes much harder when you go from an agency world
Yeah, it
to
does.
an in-house world.
Well, and, like, I think that part of why I ultimately, after 10 years in nonprofits, left was that I spent more of my time trying to teach people what brand meant internally and defend why and how powerful good branding and smart branding can be, and being authentic to your brand, right? Like, I just was doing that tour all the time, sort of like defending the need for the creative team to expand or whatever, or
Yeah,
defending the need to invest in the brand and not just run the same campaign for 3 years. It was like, I'm really tired of trying to sell people on the idea. This is where I got, at least, so super tired of trying to sell people on the idea that this matters. So I'm going to go to an agency where they must think it matters if they hire you.
right,
Somebody thinks it matters. I wanna
right.
talk to that person, but I
Better
don't
pick
have
up the
and
phone.
yeah, and, like, I still have to pitch what branding is and bring people along, which I don't mind doing, but, like, it's a different level. I spent a lot more time creating or working with a team to create than I did internally, and that burns a lot of really talented people out.
It does, I think, and it makes it very difficult for people to put together good internal teams that are of talent, and it makes it
Yeah.
more expensive to keep them around, and I do think that you have to empower collaboration with I think if you have a great internal team, one of the best things you can do is find a great agency
Oh,
partner
100%.
and let those people collaborate on more
Yes.
than just a project, and then you jump to the next group that might be full of jerks. Like, find a good group
Yeah, 100%.
of good people that are giving with their creativity
Yeah,
and let them jive with each other
yeah,
for a period of time on a lot of different stuff,
yeah.
'cause
It's
that's
so
the best.
true. We had a bunch, like, we I was always juggling vendors and the internal team and, like, I think what I found very hard was a lot of big agencies didn't wanna collaborate, didn't feel that the internal team was good enough or whatever it was, and, like, I
That's
had
why
some
don't hire
stellar
a big
people.
agency.
I know. Well, the other side of that was they wanted a portfolio piece, they wanted to say they worked for Planned Parenthood. They didn't really pay enough attention to who, like, they didn't pay enough attention to what our problem was that was being solved. We had a good run with a couple folks. We had great run with Firebelly for a while back in the day. They
Yep.
collaborated so deeply. This was years ago, probably like 2015, 16. But they collaborated really deeply with the team. We sort of like co-built a brand book and a unstoppable campaign, like a couple things that were great. And then there was a production house called Culture House, which really smart women of color, which is so rare in the video production space. And
Mhm.
like, we just found some good scrappy folks. And that was where, like, the bigger agencies just were a fail every time. I remember some really big fish, very big New York agencies just cold pitch stuff to us all the time. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I find the cold pitch to be usually like a sign that people aren't strategic. Because you don't
Yeah.
know anything about us except what you see from the outside. You don't need to investigate, but you have a brilliant idea, go. And, I got so many cold pitches for Planned Parenthood that were so, so bad.
Alright,
Always
well
by men, honestly. I shouldn't say that, but it's true. Almost always by men.
well, let me ask you this. How did the smaller, scrappier, woman of color run places, how did they get on your radars?
I
Because
mean,
I
I was constantly in search. Like, I've been a fan of I continue to be a fan of Firebelly, and the Don Hancock who founded it has become a friend, and I just, I always watch what they're doing. In fact, a couple folks that I worked with deeply have moved on and started their studio called Field of Practice, and, like, I just love to invest in learning about particularly women or minority-owned firms and these
yeah.
boutique shops that are doing the craft, like, I just try to keep my finger on the pulse of that. Also, like, I set up a criteria of what we expected in our film crews and directors, and, like, I was really tired of being surrounded by a film industry that was essentially all men, and often men who didn't have a good DEI lens, didn't understand our criteria for
Yeah.
casting or inclusivity. And there were some that were great. Like, there was a shop out of Boston with 3 guys, Windy Films, and they were like, they actually did cold pitch us, and they said, "Hey, we got a van. we'll drive anywhere to film anyone to get your story out. And I was like, all right. And they became great at this. Like, I still talk to them. Their firm has evolved and they're different now, but I still talk to the 3 guys that run that company, and they did some amazing work for us at quite a discount. And like, they were the kind of folks that you could get a story and then by the next week 30 cuts of it to go play in different states or share with different affiliates. Like, they were just like very deeply passionate and incredibly sensitive to the folks they were interviewing.
Yeah.
They were really, so like, just like the right 3 to 5 person shop I
Yeah.
was always searching for, but occasionally they came to me.
Well, it's funny. It's, even if you hire a big agency, you're getting 3 to 5 people.
I know,
That's the
that's the
team.
thing.
I mean, everyone knows that.
And I found that often the bigger agencies that we worked with, or that I was sort of handed because of relationships or whatever,
Yeah.
often like the folks in the room were like, I don't know, like, it was like you got sold the pitch where all these big ideas were and all these high up players were and the chief creative officer was there. And then the people in the room were never the people in the pitch.
Oh, I mean, that's the story. That story's as old as, yeah,
You know
time.
what I mean?
No,
Yeah.
you're pitched by the A team, and then the C team rolls up to check some boxes and make sure that
We don't do that
they
at Wide Eye. You generally, if we can, like, you talk to who's doing the work, and I think
yeah,
that's really important. That's really important to me.
it is. But it's also, you've gotta have a team of experts.
Absolutely.
So, a
And
lot
then
of
there's
places.
nuance too, right? Like, we have a
Yeah.
few Reaper clients this past year. We worked with Cecile Richards on her Abortion in America site, and then we've been doing a little work with Center for Reaper Rights. And like, it's also really imperative that someone with a uterus is leading on the team. Like,
Yeah.
you have to have a deep understanding, and it's like beyond creative expertise, you also need to ensure the people with the right lived experience are part of teams like that. And I think
Yeah.
that sensitivity matters a great deal, and is
Well,
not doesn't come into play when you're selling potato chips, really.
yeah, that's true. That's very true. And that's where just the diversity of the team in general not only makes the work better, but gives everyone a much more dynamic lens, and
Yeah,
hopefully appropriate lens that's also full of a lot of other perspectives, right? It's not like a singular, oh, it must be a singular perspective,
yeah,
but it needs to be led by a perspective that can relate.
yeah. Or at least
Um,
it has to be a voice at the
yeah,
table, right?
ab-
Like,
and not just the voice that says, "Here's the coffee."
yeah, yeah, which is how folks got away with it for many, many years.
Yes, I know. I think it still happens today. I think it still happens today that the secretary might get invited into a photo shoot with the board because the photographer might mention.
Tokenism is such a
Yeah.
big criticism.
It's just
We, we set a criteria, and this was, because of some really smart video folks on my team at the time, but we built a criteria for any cruise that we used at Planned Parenthood, and it was had to be 50% women or or person of color, and you'd be amazed at how many people said they could do that and couldn't. It was the person carrying the camera bag or
yeah.
setting up the food.
It's
And it
it
really, really, like, became something we signed into our contracts because it was so incredibly egregious how male dominated, just the film industry in general was. So
yeah.
we just had to take longer to build our crews and work with the right folks.
Well, good for you all for doing that, because it's not always people, I think, assume like, "Oh, you're a minority business, so you must get handed stuff that, because
Right.
of quotas or whatever." It's like, "No, it doesn't work like that."
No, we wanted good people at all levels of a production
Yeah.
that also were women, hopefully women of color, like,
Yeah. Well, I
and
mean,
that
of course, Planned Parenthood would, right? But I think more organizations need to take it upon themselves to enforce those sorts of things, as they should. It shouldn't be mandated by any. You shouldn't have to mandate it.
well, I mean, that's the thing is, like, the people that I didn't have to say it to
Yeah.
were the ones I wanted to work with. Windy Films, those 3 guys that ran that company, like, they always had a woman director, and if the crew was bigger than the 4 of, people, they just did that. That was part of their ethics too, and so it
Yeah.
wasn't like extra work for me to set a criteria. They were shared values, you know,
Yeah,
and
that's great.
um, obviously not a quota thing because they were 3 white dudes from Boston, but, like,
Right.
they did it right, and they had a model I really respected, and therefore, we worked with them quite a bit.
Well, I think that's great, and, people attract other people that do share values and
Yeah,
that you wanna work with, and it's great to be at this stage in our professional careers because we've met a lot of people
yeah,
and, we know who we might
and we
wanna
know the
work with
difference.
and who we
Yeah,
don't wanna work with too.
yeah, that's
So
true.
it's helpful. Well, thank you for coming back on the
Yeah,
podcast and digging in on the political side of the work that you've done. It's really fascinating and such good stuff. That's gotta feel good in the face of everything else that's going on, to know that your work was able to go out there and let people grab a hold of it and believe in it and use it to keep fighting a good fight. Like that's gotta you should be very proud.
I'm so proud of the work last year. I don't know if I'll recover from the loss of this election and the ramifications of that, and I don't hold myself or our team responsible for that, though I examine it all constantly. I think I'm just gonna be, like, reflecting on that brand and some of the work we did for so many years just because
That
I was
is
watching
look,
in real
I mean,
time.
it's the risk you run by caring,
Yeah,
and you got to do work that you cared about and believed in,
yeah.
and I can't imagine how it's extra crushing when the campaign doesn't win, when these
I
people
really didn't
succeed,
think it
it's
would happen.
extra crushing. It's not like, "Oh, we didn't hit our sales goals for the potato
Right,
chips."
right. I mean, yes, the
It
level of
is it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry we couldn't save the world."
yeah. I mean,
It's a little higher stakes.
I felt deeply sad for Harris, and it's not like we're, like, buddies, it's just that
Yeah.
I thought about her so much and, like, put so much of her and what I knew of her into this brand, and so, like, I was just so sad, not just for our country, but, like, just for Harris, like, a public servant who's, like, a true public servant and cares deeply about this country, which I don't think is mirrored on the other side. Like, that sadness is just something, I can't I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure she'll go on to do great things as she has her whole life and
Oh,
career, but
I know, but I hear you, like, what a fucking opportunity missed. I'm
yeah,
so mad I
and what a
don't get to
competent
experience
experience. Yeah,
having her lead this country.
yeah,
I'm so pissed
I know.
and sad.
Rage is real.
Yeah, the rage is real.
I'm finding healthy outlet.
Well, yes,
Talking to others. This is what's
rage
happening.
rage into healthy outlets, as much as possible, and, I mean, you win some, you lose some, but you gotta keep
This
swinging.
is a deep loss, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's
One of
just
the
hope it
things yeah,
wasn't,
ton.
yeah, wasn't the deadly one.
Interestingly, like, Hillary Clinton spoke at Cecile Richards' service in New York, and she said a quote. She's known Cecile, I think, because Cecile, I don't know if you know much about Cecile Richards, but her mom was, the governor of Texas and a
That's right,
fierce yeah,
I do remember that.
force in her own right, and so Hillary, I think, knew Cecile since she was, like, 12 or something, so that's part of why she went and spoke, but she gave a quote of Cecile's that was like, "Politics is losing and losing and losing until you win." And that's how she kept fighting.
Yeah.
And, like, I just thought, "I'm gonna hang on to that because I've lost a lot." And I feel like Toby Ziegler in The West Wing. I'm like, I'm trying so hard for good in this world, and, like, I've been through a lot of losses, and I think that's that mantra, like, I need to put it up on my wall somewhere, that quote, because that was the kind of thing that Cecile Richards would say and how she would stay in the fight and inspire others to do the same, so
Yeah, it's a great quote, and it's a great quote to end on. So let's all just keep ourselves and our spirits, in the good fight,
yeah,
and don't don't stop looking for joy too.
yeah.
It's there, and meanwhile, thank you again for being on, and,
Yeah,
take
talk
care.
more soon. Thank you.
Ah.